Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So just before we go back to Susanna Weiss's article, Fem-splaining to men's rights activists, I just want to have a quick look at the figures that I went over last episode. Because I figured with the stats that we have, we should be able to figure out the worldwide percentages for men and women who are victims of domestic homicide. So we know that 78% of all homicides worldwide are male, which means 22% of all world homicides are female. And we know 50% of them are domestic. So 50% of 22% is 11%. So we have a worldwide figure of 11% of all homicides are female victims of domestic homicide. Now, according to Susanna, 1 in 20 males who are victims of homicide are domestic homicide victims, which is 5%. So 5% of 78% is 3.9%. So we have two figures here. We have 11% of all homicides are female domestic homicides, and we'll say 4% of the overall homicide figure are males. So that works out at just under 1/3 are male, which is exactly in line with the American figures, as well as being similar to the Australian ones that I presented. Now this is a long way away from female homicide victims, domestic homicide victims, being 10 times greater as presented by Susanna Weiss. She presents it as 10 times greater. The reality is it's just over 2 times greater. And the interesting thing is that even though roughly 1/3 of the victims are male, women get 100% of funding for domestic violence. Well, alright, let's say 99.99999%, because, you know, there are the odd male shelters here or there. I think there's one in America. Yeah, so one shelter in America, which I think is probably privately funded. I'm not sure on that fact, to be fair. But we'll say less than 1% of funding goes to male victims, and that's being generous. So this clearly isn't proportional, and for the record, I'm just dealing with people who have died here, not the actual victims of domestic violence itself. That's closer to 50-50. In fact, some studies have said 50-50, some have said 60-40, but it is a lot higher than 1/3. But usually we hear that women die at a greater rate, which technically is true, and therefore should have greater funding. But the point is, they don't get proportional funding. Well, I should say men don't get proportional funding. Now, imagine if we did this in other areas, right? Let's say suicide, for example. The vast majority of suicides are male. So imagine we didn't give any funding towards females, right? So there was no funding towards prevention for females who might commit suicide. There was no hospital spots for females who attempted suicide. No psychological help. There was no awareness campaigns. Nothing, absolutely zero, when it came to helping females who might commit suicide. And we just gave all the money to male awareness and to help prevent men from committing suicide. Could you imagine how incredibly unfair that would be? Could you imagine the feminist outcry over that? It would be the perfect example of how we live in a patriarchy which doesn't care about women and oppresses them, right? Yet that's exactly what we see when it comes to domestic violence. Only the other way around, the genders are flipped. I could make the same argument with homelessness. The vast majority of the homeless are in fact men. And despite this, females often get special services. Now, I know the counter to this is that women often have children. Well, I've no problem with families getting special services. Parents with children, no issue with that. But typically, even single women with no kids get special services, even though they're a minority. So imagine we just gave all the services to men, right? We opened up homeless shelters just for men. We gave food and clothing just to the male homeless. And we said to the females who are homeless, you just have to go and fend for yourself. You know, too bad. You don't count. Could you imagine the fucking outcry? Once again, this would be the perfect example of the patriarchy and how women are less valued and how women are oppressed. Yet that is exactly what we see with domestic violence. Only, once again, the genders are flipped. And not only do feminists support this, but they actively inflate statistics to make it an entrenched position while claiming that they care about male victims. It's a fucking joke. So, inflating figures or leaving out key information or misrepresenting the facts, this is all done to create a narrative of women being the oppressed victim class and males being the domineering, aggressive perpetrator class. In fact, Susanna goes on to explain that this is all part of male supremacy a bit later, but we'll get to that. Before then, I want to do a quick debunk of a meme I've seen floating around the last couple of years, which really sums up this whole thing very nicely, because it is so idiotic, and it misrepresents some very basic facts, and it's devoid of logic. But it's so easy to see what it's trying to do, and that is to create men as the dangerous perpetrator class and females as their victims. So it reads, hashtag yes all women, because the odds of being attacked by a shark are 1 in 3,748,067, while a woman's odds of being raped are 1 in 6. Yet fear of sharks is seen as rational, while being cautious of men is seen as misandry. Obviously the person who made this wasn't very good with logic. You see, your average woman comes in contact with men on a daily basis. There may be male members of her family. She may have male friends. She'll come across men when she's walking down the street, when she's on the bus, when she's on a train, when she's working in the office, when she goes to a restaurant, when she goes to a theatre. I mean, you name it, right? Any public activity just about anywhere involves coming in contact with men. In fact, on a daily basis, the average woman must come in contact with a dozen men minimum, if not 100 or so, depending on what their day entails. Whereas your average woman may not come across a shark her entire lifetime. In fact, the vast majority of women will never come across a shark. So it's comparing something which is extremely common and everyday and has an extremely low risk, because your average woman coming in contact with dozens or maybe even up to 100 men a day doesn't get raped or beaten or killed. And it's comparing that extremely common thing with an extremely low rate of harm to something which is exceptionally rare with a very, very high rate of harm. And that's just fucking dishonest. It's like saying cars are more dangerous than erupting volcanoes, because more people die in car accidents than are killed by erupting volcanoes. Yeah, that's because people drive cars every single day, and most of the time, people are perfectly fine. The vast majority of people who get in their cars every single day and drive to work or to do the shopping or whatever aren't injured or killed. You can't say the same for someone standing next to an erupting volcano, right? The reason why more people die in car accidents is because erupting volcanoes are exceptionally rare. But using this logic, it would be safer to stand next to an erupting volcano. I encourage feminists to try it. Please. If you think being more scared of sharks than men is irrational, by all means, I encourage you to go stand next to an erupting volcano. Please. The world will be better off without you. A few less idiots isn't going to hurt the gene pool. But this is because it's narrative over logic. It's narrative over reason. It's narrative over facts. And the narrative here is men are dangerous. Men should be feared. All the issues of the world are because of men. And women, once again, are their victims. And they will go to just about any lengths to do this. They will minimize male victims. They will delete male victims. They will exaggerate harm to women. And the whole time they're supporting a narrative. Now, 40 years ago, Erin Pizzey was saying that both males and females are victims of domestic abuse. And domestic abuse is generational. If a child grows up in a violent home, then that child will have a higher chance of growing up and being violent themselves, be they male or female. But she was attacked by feminists. She got bomb threats from feminists because they didn't like this message, because their narrative was men are the perpetrator class and females are their victims. And it's only in the last couple of years that this feminist narrative is slowly starting to change. After 40 years of the gender-biased narrative which paints men as the domineering aggressors who, beat women because they want to keep them in their place, finally there are some feminists who are starting to admit that violence is generational, that women can be violent too, and men can be their victims. And do you know why they're starting to do that? Because of men's rights activists bombarding them with this shit, with this information, which they've tried to ignore, which they've tried to suppress, which they constantly... That's why they constantly try to demonize us, because they don't want people listening to what we say. But it's reached a point where they don't have a choice. That is why Susanna has written this article, and that is why Susanna is admitting that men actually have issues. Some issues. But she's still doing the standard thing of trying to minimize them and exaggerate women's issues but women always have it worse. And like I said, as we're about to see in a minute, she's going to pull out the male supremacy card. Now, I know I've rambled on a little bit about this, and I promise I will get back to the article in a second, but there is just one more point I want to make about the narrative that men are the most dangerous thing in the world to women. If we look at the causes of death in the USA for females, homicide comes in at number 35. Now keep in mind that only half of them are domestic violence deaths. So homicide at 35, and female suicide comes in at 25. So women are actually more likely to kill themselves than to be killed by a man. In fact, according to these stats, women are almost 6 times as likely to kill themselves as opposed to being murdered by a spouse in a domestic violence situation. So it would seem that women are a greater danger to themselves than men are to them, if we're going to play the numbers game like feminists like to do. But anyway, let's get back to the article.
And that's not a coincidence. The violence we experience in our own lives is a reflection of the violent ideologies directed toward us. That's why we talk about violence toward women and LGBTQIA+ people. Not because it matters more. Because it reflects a troubling pattern. It reflects that a quarter of young people believe it's normal for guys to pressure girls into sex.
It reflects that a quarter of young people believe it's normal for guys to pressure girls into sex. And she has a citation for this, so let's go check out her citation. And it links to an article by Glamour called "A Quarter of Young People Think Pressuring Someone into Sex is Normal." And oh, look who wrote it. It's Susanna Wise. She likes to use herself as citations. Now, it's a fairly short article, so I guess we'll go through the entire thing.
Our Watch, an organization that fights violence against women, interviewed 604 people ages 12 to 20 about their experiences and attitudes regarding sexual misconduct, and it found some disturbing results. Violation of girls' boundaries is so prevalent and starts so young that it can come to seem normal, and according to a new study, people are viewing it that way. A quarter of those surveyed agreed with the statement, "It is normal for guys to put some pressure on girls to do sexual things." Just as troubling, 11% of respondents believed it was true that if a female wears revealing clothing, she is at least partly responsible for unwanted sex. Over a quarter said it was hard to respect a woman who wore revealing clothing. Given these attitudes, it's not too surprising that 1 in 5 women said they'd been pressured into sex, though only 7% of men admitted to doing so. In addition, 16% of girls said that someone had publicly shared embarrassing photos of them, and 11% of boys said they were guilty of circulating such photos. These results make it clear that the sexual assault epidemic starts very early on, and that one crucial measure for combating it is teaching young people that coercion is not normal and victims are not even partly to blame.
Okay, so there are a number of issues with this article and the survey that it's based upon. The first one is it only interviewed 604 people, which is a very small sample size to make the sweeping statement that a quarter of young people think pressuring someone into sex is normal. Now, I'm guessing these 604 people were from the same area, so maybe you could conclude that this is a problem in that area, but to say it's a problem everywhere, I think is stretching it. I mean, for example, if you did a survey of 604 people aged 12 to 20 in the Bible Belt, you would come to the conclusion that the majority of 12 to 20-year-olds are evangelical Christians, for example. That doesn't mean that the majority of 12 to 20-year-olds throughout the Western world are evangelical Christians. The same could not be said for here in Melbourne or in England or Canada or other parts of America, for example. So it's a very small sample size, especially if you consider they've probably interviewed 50-50 male-female, at least I hope so. But in that case, we're talking about 302 females and 302 males. Another question I have is, how do they define pressured? Now, I'm not suggesting pressuring someone into sex is good, but could pressuring be asking more than once? That's very different than forcing someone, right? So we could be talking about anything from very slight, unharmful things to things which could be considered harmful. It's like that sexual assault and misconduct survey that Susanna linked to earlier. Probably my biggest issue with it, though, is it starts with the conclusion and then only looks at certain pieces of information to support that conclusion. And what I mean is they only asked females if they've been pressured into sex, and they only asked males if they've pressured females into sex. Do you see? It's directional. There is no consideration even that females might do the same behaviour. That doesn't seem to have even been considered in any way. And then when they only look for half the information, they then use this to support their original conclusion, which only looks at half the picture. Could you imagine doing a study which only looked at black on white crime and totally excluded any white on black crime? If you did something like that, you would come to the conclusion that black people are violent and white people are victims, and it's one directional, right? It would be incredibly biased and dishonest. And that's why I say feminists like Susanna have an agenda. They have a narrative that they want to support. The female victim, male perpetrator narrative. Despite the fact that Susanna is supposedly interested in male victims. The fact that she links to studies that don't even consider male victims tells me a totally different story. Now, let me give you an example of a good feminist who actually does care about male victims. Now, I've covered this article before in previous videos, so I'm only going to do a small section, but I think it speaks volumes about what I'm talking about. It appeared in Huffington Post and was written by Hecate Papadaki, and I've probably murdered her name there, but anyway, in her article, she has this to say.
When I was an undergraduate, A boyfriend told me he lost his virginity at 15 to a pair of 17-year-old twin sisters who raped him at a party. He didn't call it rape. Instead, he said, "I didn't want it to happen. It felt bad." My friends laughed. They said I'd lived every man's dream. I wasn't sure what to make of that information. Though I believed him, his confession didn't register with me as rape till years later. A number of female friends have confided in me similar experiences over the years. Sometimes their words were equally measured, especially when the perpetrator had been a close relative. The words rape or sexual abuse were not used, but when I listened to them, I had no doubts about what they were saying. So why did it take me so long to equate the experiences? The more I think about it, the more similar cases I remember. There was, for instance, my male friend at uni who was in a long-distance relationship with a girl who rung a dozen times a day to check up on him. When he flew home over the holidays on an overnight flight, she bullied him into having sex as soon as he walked through the door, then bullied him even worse for being too tired to become aroused. Another friend's girlfriend signed him out of hospital on the same day he'd removed his appendix to take him home and have sex. Then there were the girls in my school who sneaked into the boys' toilets and made fun of boys' genitals. When I discussed these events with male friends, they weren't surprised. Some relayed worse experiences of their own. And yet of all my male friends, only one openly recognized that he'd been sexually abused by women. According to the Office of National Statistics, only 0.3% of men in the UK experience sexual violence each year. But judging by the experiences of men in my social cycle, that statistic sounds improbable. A 2012 literature review estimated that 19 to 31% of U.S. male college students experienced some kind of unwanted sexual contact. The problem is, gender norms are so fixed that we refuse to recognize male victims of sexual violence just as we refuse to identify female perpetrators. As a woman, I was taught from a very early age that men are always after sex, the same way I was taught that sex is not a primary drive for women. Ridiculous as both these statements sound, they're still inscribed on our social psyche.
And of course this is all supported by the CDC's forced to penetrate stats. Yet feminists like Susanna Wise routinely use bias studies which only show one side, which erase male victims, which only talk about males as perpetrators and females as victims, to support the narrative that, sure, this happens to men too, but hold on, we need to concentrate on women. Here's why we need to concentrate on women. Let's only talk about women. And I can't help but think she's not really interested in male victims. If she was, then why use a biased study which only looks at half the picture? But we have a lot more article to get through, so let's go back to it.
It reflects that in relationships between men and women, men are considered the aggressors while women are the gatekeepers.
Now, Susanna's citation for this links to an article on everyday feminism called 4 Seemingly Harmless Gender Stereotypes That Contribute to Rape Culture. And once again, this is another article by Susanna herself. She likes to use her previous articles as citations. But anyway, if we scroll down to 4, men are aggressive while women are gentle. I'm guessing this is the bit that she's talking about. Now, I won't go through the entire section, but there is one point I do want to bring up. It says here, when men act violently towards women or one another, people rush to say that boys will be boys. Yet when women act remotely violently, even in self-defense, they're demonized. I have to wonder what fucking planet Susanna is living on. This is such a fucking joke. Whenever women are violent towards men, in any way, the first question that is asked is, what did he do to deserve it?
Here's a little reminder of the danger of a woman scorned.
beware.
Ashley Madison.
Yes.
Watch what happens on the streets of Hong Kong when a young female confronts her boyfriend and accuses him of cheating.
On Ashley Madison.
Oh, dear me.
What's happening?
The incident drew a crowd and police eventually arrested the woman and charged her with assault.
Is this not a joke?
No.
Oh, this
The clip's become a viral hit, but it's quite serious.
Well, the question is, did he deserve that?
Even when a woman drugs a man, ties him to a chair, and cuts off his penis because he had the nerve to ask her for a divorce, even in those circumstances, the question is asked, what did he do to deserve it?
This woman. We're about to go there because this woman allegedly did. According to the Orange County DA's office, Catherine Q. Becker is accused of cutting off her husband's penis with a knife, taking his penis and throwing it into the garbage disposal. She's been charged with felony torture and aggravated mayhem. Police say Becker attacked him because he filed for divorce. She's being held. She goes, that'll teach him. She is being held in a California jail while her husband remains in the hospital.
I bet you that those prison guards are wearing one of those things that footballers wear? Those metal cups.
Oh, yeah, that the athletes wear?
Yes, yes.
Jock straps.
Cups.
Yes. I mean, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know why he filed for divorce. I don't know what was going on between them. However, I do think it's quite fabulous. I mean, can you just imagine that thing whizzing around the disposal? It's like hysterical. But, however, I think I would have just, depending on why she cut it off. I mean, it does depend on the reasons why.
Does it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, standards.
What would be an acceptable reason?
I'll think of one. But I would have just thrown it in the dog's bowl.
Why does the dog have to suffer?
Chewing on an old bone.
We as a society are constantly making excuses for female criminals, for female violent behaviour, for female sexual assault. It is seen as different when women do it. It is excused away when women do it. Yet somehow, according to Susanna, these poor women are demonised. Yeah, sure. Next.
It reflects that college men are taught, no means yes, yes means anal.
Okay, so the incident that Susanna is talking about here was a bunch of drunken college guys at a university chanting a song in bad taste. You could argue that, yeah, it's in bad taste. But it clearly wasn't something to be taken serious, right? The way Susanna presents it here as if it's a fucking university course. These guys are being brainwashed into thinking that this is actually acceptable, as opposed to a chant which obviously was designed to offend, right? I mean, if we were to use Susanna's standards here, then surely every single feminist who took part in Kill All Men should be arrested for murder, right? That's the type of fucking hyperbole that we're dealing with here with Susanna. And clearly it's fucking bullshit. Now, once again, I've run out of time. I didn't even get to the male supremacy part, which I was hoping to get to. But, I got sidetracked with all the fucking citations and bullshit. But just before I go, there are a couple of things I want to quickly comment on. The first is the male numbers for those statistics I gave earlier. So homicide for women is 35, for men homicide is 26. And for women suicide was 25, for men it is 7. So just to put those numbers in proper perspective. And there's one more thing you may have noticed when I put up the stats for women dying, and that is number 29. It seems that there are more women who have died of diarrhea than have died from domestic violence. Now, I'm not minimising domestic violence or those who die from it. By all means, I think it's something that we should deal with. We should have campaigns to try to stop it. Campaigns for both men and women, that is. And it's something we should talk about and deal with as a society. But I just want to put it in its proper context, because the way feminists talk about it and the way these campaigns are worded, it's an epidemic, and it's the number one killer of women, and it's the evil men doing it to the poor helpless women, and it's a war on women. Yet, in reality, women are more likely to die of diarrhea than they are to die from domestic violence or homicide in general. That's not to diminish female victims of domestic abuse, but just to put it in proper context. Now, many of you outside Australia have probably never heard the name Rosie Batty. She was part of a rather tragic story a number of years ago where her ex-husband rather brutally murdered their son. Now, in Rosie Batty's own words, she said no one loved Luke more than his father. What triggered this was a case of his dad having mental health issues. He was in a homeless situation for many years. His life was failing. Everything was becoming worse in his life, and Luke was the only bright light in his life. That's Rosie Batty's own words about her ex-husband. Yet, strangely, she didn't go on to become a mental health campaigner, but went on to become a domestic violence campaigner. A rather prominent one, too. Now, have a listen to what she says in this clip. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. First of all, a woman dies of domestic abuse in Australia every 6 days, and a man dies of domestic abuse every 10. Keep that in mind as you listen to this clip.
All right, let's move on to our next question from Crikey. There it is.
Bernard King from Crikey. Thank you both for your addresses today. The response from men's rights groups and men's rights activists, I guess, is probably going to be somewhat hostile to the proposals that have been outlined today. And we've seen in the past that such groups can get a lot of traction with politicians and have been quite influential in, for example, changing the way that family law operates. Assuming that this is the start of a debate going forward over coming months, not just obviously in this election campaign, what's your message to politicians, both of you? What's your message to politicians about, and the media for that matter, about what they'll hear in the course of that debate over the idea that family violence is, well, just another mechanism to get men in the family court process? Rather than something more balanced?
Well, I think Danny's obviously very well equipped to answer this, and perhaps more so than myself. But I will say that wherever I speak, it is still a very contentious point to make this to bring this up as a gendered issue. There are still as many men, women, I would think, that really don't want to see this as a gendered issue, that want to see that women are violent too. And I think we have to be reasonable and, you know, we never have said that all men are bad and all women are good. I think we've gone past that debate. But I do think we need to acknowledge the statistics are incredibly clear, and we need to be very informed with those statistics, and we need to source them from the correct places so that we can see them clearly. We have currently up to 2 women a week being murdered. 2 women a week being murdered. These statistics are there. And police business, I would suggest to any politician, if they're very unclear, to go out with the police in the family violence squad and go and see and attend the call-outs and then make comment. The evidence is all there. This is not a feminist conspiracy. This is, I watch the news every night when I'm home. What do I see? I see men's violence. I don't know what other people see, but I see whether it's terrorism, whether it's violence on the streets, whether it's family violence. That's what I see. So I think we're just so conditioned that we don't see what is actually in front of us, because this issue has always been around. So I think, I'd really welcome Danny's comment, but I think it's really inviting the politicians to be informed about this issue, not influenced by those in, if the facts are the facts, you can't be swayed. That's the reality as I see it.
The facts are the facts. That's the way she sees it. And she actually doubles the number of female victims, unless a week is now 12 days long, that is, and totally erases male victims. They don't exist. It's a gendered issue. It's men doing it to women. Male victims don't exist. It's a problem to do with men. And then she just doubles the number of female victims to make it seem worse than what it actually is. And in fact, I suspect she got the 2 females killed a week stat from England. And in case you're not aware, England has a much, much bigger population than Australia, which would account for more deaths per week, right? So this is the bullshit that we have to put up with. This is the bullshit that we're facing. This fucking ideological narrative which deletes male victims and exaggerates the number of female victims. Now, let's have a listen to what this guy has to say.
Yeah, look, my consistent response to men's rights activism and people asking how do you respond and what do you think of them is ultimately men's rights movements are doing a huge disservice to the men. Yeah. Ultimately what they're doing is they are pouring petrol on a fire, and they are reinforcing men's beliefs that there is a conspiracy against them, that all women are stupid and they're just out to get them and we know better and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't end up working well for them. It might make them feel pretty good at the time. And I've been in some men's groups, not behaviour change programs, but other men's groups where men will drop comments like, I don't know what I'll do if she takes the kids away from me. And it has gone unresponded. There's been no follow-up. And the rest of the guys are going, that's fueling a fire that is inherently dangerous, and ultimately that doesn't work for the bloke, because it's not going to mean that he's going to have meaningful relationships, at least the current relationship with his children or future relationships. If the broader men's movement is serious about engaging effectively with men, supporting men, providing opportunities for men to be the man they want to be, a better man they want to be, a contributing human being to our community, then it's a much gentler conversation, and we need to be challenging those standard forms of masculinity that a lot of MRAs run on, that we know are fanciful. They're not the reality that actually works. They're the stuff that is dangerous, and they get themselves in trouble.
What a fucking idiot.